Welcome to Art with Addie. I'm Addie, and this is where you learn how to paint. Hey guys, welcome back. Happy Tuesday and happy October. I am personally not a fan of carving pumpkins. It's a lot of hard work. It's goopy, it's gross. So we're gonna paint one instead. A real tiny little pumpkin. There are two major reasons why I love October so much. Okay, maybe three. One, it's kind of like fall. Not really for Arizona, but still. Two, Halloween. Duh, come on. Three, it's my birthday month. Also, are those real cobwebs? Are they fake cobwebs? Who knows? Quick reminder before we get started, please hit the subscribe button, hit like on this video, and tick the little bell so you'll get notifications when I drop a new video every single Tuesday. They did the mash. They did the monster mash. Love potion. Let's do this.
Alright, first thing you're going to need is a small pumpkin, specifically with a stem to pick it up with. For paints, you'll need acrylic paints, black, white, red, yellow, and blue at minimum. If you have additional colors beyond that, even better. For paintbrushes, acrylic specific would be best, or multi-purpose. We will be using medium down to very fine point tips. A cup of water, paper towels, a palette for mixing your paint. I just taped wax paper to the back of a cutting board, paint mixing sticks, and Mod Podge. Here's a look at the pumpkin that I picked for this project. It doesn't have to be this exact size. I'm pretty good at painting the very fine details, so if you have difficulties with getting really small details, I suggest going with a little bit bigger pumpkin than this. It also doesn't have to be white, but it does make the paint stand out a little bit more and makes it a little bit brighter. I am starting with a full rounded soft brush just to get a base coat on the upper half of the pumpkin. I already have this pre-mixed blue in a tube. The particular shade of blue doesn't really matter right now as it is going to be a base coat. So we're just starting from the center of the stem and working our way down. I am being pretty careful as to not get any paint on the stem. If you want to paint the stem itself, that is totally up to you. We will be putting multiple layers of paint on top of this shade of blue, so if you can still see the white or orange coming through, that's okay. We're gonna go in with black on the very bottom of this. So I suggest if you have a stem on your pumpkin to pick it up by the stem, and then turning the pumpkin upside down using the same brush. It is completely up to you on where you want this horizon line between the black and the blue to lie. It's just dependent on whether or not you want more sky in your scene or more of the ground. Since I have a pretty small pumpkin, I don't want to take up too much of the space with black, so I'm doing it majority blue. Now we're just going to make a smooth line between the blue and the black for our horizon line. This line does not need to be completely straight because we are going to be drawing some little houses, graveyards, and a little tree, basically whatever you want to go on there, so it doesn't have to be totally straight. As you can see, I am using my pinky to help stabilize my hand. I don't have the most steady hand in the world, so this does help with the shake. Once we're done with the black, I'm going to let it dry kind of leaning on the stem so it doesn't smudge the black, and by this time the blue should be dry anyway. Next we're going to start working in the gradient of the sky. So we're going to make a couple different shades of purple, and you can make purple by mixing blue and red. The particular shade of purple doesn't really matter. If you want a brighter purple sky, you can do that. If you want a deeper blue like I have, you're just going to want to mix more blue than red, but it's totally up to you. After you have made the shade of purple / blue, I'm going to just set a little bit aside and mix some white with it, as that's the color that we're going to be using right along the horizon line. Sticking with that same brush, we're just going to carefully go right along the horizon line, being careful not to mix it too much into the black. And once we have made the full circle all the way around right along the black, we're going to go up just a little bit more to make a thicker line of the shade of purple. After you have allowed the black portion to dry enough, you can now set that down because you're basically done with the bottom half of that anyway. And we're going to start with the darker shade of purple, going all the way from the stem and blending that down into that shade of purple that we just put on there. After we lay the shade completely down, we're going to just use a very small amount of water on the tip of our brush and just try to blend in those two shades of purple a little bit there. Alright, next we're going to make a darker shade of blue, a darker shade than the original base coat that we put on before. So I already have a kind of darker shade of blue, and I'm just going to mix a very small amount of black to that. The next brush that I'm using is a flat but rounded soft brush. And we're going to take that blue and start again from the stem and work our way out to just about the top circle of this, so not going more than about 1/4 of the way down to that last purple shade that we just put on there. And we want to use a pretty small amount of paint to make sure that we blend it in with the purple. Feel free to pick up the pumpkin by the stem and twist it around as you're going around the stem. No need to get up and move around your pumpkin. From there, I still have some extra of that blue that I just made, so I'm going to be mixing a shade darker of blue. So if you still have some extra, just mix some more black into it. If not, just make a new shade but add more black. We are again starting from the stem and blending into the blue that we just made, but not totally covering that entire lap of blue that we just made. And here's a look at where my pumpkin is at so far. Again, it doesn't have to be exactly like this, just try to follow along the best you can. We are now going to start painting on the moon and the shadows along with the tree and the stars. So try to pick the best spot that you can work on your pumpkin. For me, this seems to be the widest and flattest portion of my pumpkin. And that way we can kind of see the whole scene by just looking at it straight on. I am again working with that smaller, flat, rounded brush. And we're going to use just pure white, and we're going to draw basically a half circle going from the horizon line above. Since we are putting this white paint on a darker shade than white, it's going to take quite a few coats. So we will be coming back to adding more layers of this white throughout the painting. You also have the option here to give the moon more of a yellow color or orange. It's kind of however you want the moon to look, and I think any three of those shades will look pretty cool. For mine, I am opting to do a pretty white moon and then going with just kind of this like yellowish glow on the outer edge. Another option for this moon is actually giving it a blue tint to it, so if you want to keep it like that, you can just put on 1 or 2 layers. We're going to be working with more details now, so pull out your fine tip brush. I'm going with the smallest brush that I have. And we're going to be painting in the shadows of the house, the tree, and the 2 headstones for the graveyard. This does not have to be any particular size or shape, just something that kind of resembles a house. So I'm just drawing a box with a triangle on top of it. Since we are working with the fine tip brush, it is easy to get kind of clumps of paint on the tip of your brush. So just be sure to rinse off and wipe off all of the excess paint along the way right here. If you want to put in multiple houses and no gravestones or a bunch of trees, this part is completely up to you. If you want to make a tree or 2, just follow along with what I am doing here, just making a thicker line that is thicker along the base for the trunk itself, and then just making a few random branches. For the little graveyard, I am basically just making like a rounded oval and then putting a tiny little cross on the top. And if you're working with a little bit of a larger pumpkin, you don't have to use quite as small of a brush if it is taking more time for you. I would like my moon to be a little brighter white with a yellow ring around it, so I am now putting in another layer of white. If you want to keep yours to have a blue tint to it, you can leave it with just 1 or 2 layers. Here I'm using the yellow that I have and mixing just a little bit of white so it's not so neon. And I'm going to draw in 2 tiny little squares for 2 windows on my little house. And I'm also using that same shade of yellow just to make an outline, kind of like a halo going on the outer edge of the moon. You also have the option of putting in some sort of patches, so it kind of shows a little more detail in the moon with this yellow if you'd like. And here I'm just going in with another layer of white in the center of the moon. I do have two different types of white acrylic paint. I kind of noticed earlier on that the bigger tube that I was using is a little bit thinner paint. And I'm gonna go in and make some stars, so I'm gonna use my thicker paint for that so I don't have to double over on the layer of paint here. So here I am using the finest tip brush that I have again and just making very sporadic small dots up in the darker purple and above. If you happen to have paintbrushes that are very small circles on the wooden end of it, you can also dip your paint in that and use that to get perfect little circles for the stars. I am yet again putting in another layer of white on my moon because I do want this to be a very bright white. That's just kind of my particular taste for this painting. We will be drawing like 3 tiny little bats that are in the middle of this moon as well, so having it be that brighter shade of white will make those bats stand out a little bit more. And here I am going in on top of the moon. Once you've got the right shade of the moon that you would like, then you can go ahead and make these bats. And if you remember as you're a kid, drawing like the little birds in the skyline is kind of the same idea here, but instead of making like a curved M, we're gonna make a pointy M. The number of bats that we put on the moon is completely up to you. I just kind of had just enough space to make 3 bats. Alright, here's what my pumpkin looks like so far. This is kind of like the basic level of what you could do for this pumpkin. If you want to keep watching, you can add in a little bit more detail and follow along with what I'm doing. I'm not totally happy with the way that my moon turned out, so I'm going to go back in and brighten that up a little bit more, and I'm also going to put some extra depth to the shadows by putting some shades of gray in there. Again, if you're working with an orange moon or a yellow moon, or you're wanting it to stay that kind of blue tinge to it, then this step is pretty unnecessary for you right now. So the next part that I'm doing here is making a gray, and I want it to be noticeable on the black, so we want to make it just light enough to where you can kind of see the moon glowing on those shadows that we made. Here I'm using this gray just on the upper and left hand side of all these shapes that we made earlier. And this just shows kind of where the moon is reflecting onto these objects. When it comes to the tree, I'm really just going to draw a line on the trunk just because those lines are so tiny on the branches. After that, I'm going to just make one shade lighter of gray, and I'm going to go in on the same spots that we just did that gray, but just make slightly smaller lines. Here's what my finished pumpkin looks like. If you want to go in and make even more shapes, go further around your pumpkin, feel free to do that right now. Since we don't really need to preserve this object that we're painting on today because it will eventually rot, you don't have to put a clear coat on it, but if you would like to, you can always put on a clear coat of Mod Podge or similar sealant.
If you want to get a sneak peek as to what I am working on for next week, be sure to follow me on Instagram and check out my stories. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for next week when I do even more glorious Halloween and fall type things. I have no idea what I'm gonna be for Halloween. Are we still doing that? Is that still a thing this year? Who do I call? Who knows what's happening? I could be a paintbrush.